Katherine Korzilius was a vibrant, precocious 6-year-old with a laugh that could light up even the gloomiest day. Born in 1989, she was the cherished daughter of Paul Korzilius, a man whose name was synonymous with rock and roll as the tour manager for the iconic Bon Jovi. Despite the glitz and glamour associated with her father's world, Katherine's life unfolded in the quiet, sun-drenched suburbs of Austin, Texas. The Korzilius family called Elder Circle home, a seemingly idyllic neighborhood where manicured lawns and towering oak trees created a picture-perfect facade. It was a world away from the raucous concert stages her father inhabited, a place where childhood innocence reigned supreme. Yet this bubble of tranquility would shatter on an ordinary August afternoon. A day that began with mundane errands would morph into a nightmare that would haunt the community for years to come. On that fateful day, August 7, 1996, Katherine, her mother Nancy, and her brother Chris left home for a routine outing. They stopped at their math tutor, Subway for sandwiches, and picked up golf clubs for Paul's birthday. As the afternoon drew to a close, the family headed for home. Before home, they made one final stop at the community mailbox, which was a ritual Katherine adored. In the simple act of retrieving the family mail, she found a sense of independence, a small victory in her journey to adulthood. Nancy recalls the sparkle in her daughter's eyes as she eagerly approached the weathered wooden box. "I had allowed Katherine to do that because I knew she was ready to be more independent, and she had done it before." The familiar route home split in two at the community mailbox. While Nancy and Chris opted for the longer, circuitous drive, Katherine embarked on the shorter, more direct path. A sense of normalcy hung heavy in the air as Nancy and Chris pulled into the driveway. "It's a short walk, probably less than a quarter of a mile. When Chris and I got home, we unloaded our car and we started putting our packages away." Then, a mother's intuition, sharp and primal, stirred Nancy. Katherine should have been back home by now. Nancy enlisted her son Chris with a simple task: go find his sister. When Chris returned, his face was filled with confusion and fear. Katherine was nowhere to be found. It was at that moment they knew something terrible had happened. Time seemed to stand still as Nancy and Chris frantically searched for Katherine. Then, they found her. A mere 6 houses from their home, a tiny figure lay on the unforgiving asphalt. It was Katherine. Curled into a fetal position, she lay there unconscious. Yet, a flicker of hope ignited within Nancy. Her daughter's chest rose and fell in a faint rhythm. Nancy scooped Katherine into her arms, put her in the car, and raced to the hospital. I could tell that she was unconscious, but she was breathing. I knew it was too hot to leave her on the pavement. I know that it's never a good idea to move somebody if you don't know what their injuries are, but I just couldn't leave her there. And I think having driven her to the emergency room before, knowing the way very well, I felt confident that I was able to drive that drive. 25 minutes later, they arrived at Seton Medical Center. The weight of the world seemed to crash down on them when the doctors delivered the diagnosis: a fractured skull. The once familiar contours of their lives dissolved into a surreal nightmare. With each passing moment, hope dwindled further. And then the inevitable happened. Katherine, the girl with the infectious laughter, never regained consciousness and died later that day. At the time of the tragic accident, Paul was in New York City on business and arrived back in Texas too late to say goodbye to Katherine. I arranged for a charter aircraft so I could come directly home, but in the end it was too late anyway. I arrived at 12:30 in the morning, and I believe she was pronounced dead at 11:30 that night, an hour before my arrival. The initial assumption was stark: a tragic hit-and-run killed Katherine. The image of a frightened child struck down by a fleeing motorist was a narrative that resonated with the community's collective horror. Yet, as the investigation deepened, cracks began to appear in this seemingly straightforward explanation. Elder Circle was not a thoroughfare. Cars were a rare sight, and the physical evidence spoke volumes. There were no frantic squeals of tires, no shattered glass, no debris strewn across the asphalt to corroborate the hit-and-run theory. Neighbors were equally baffled. No one had witnessed anything out of the ordinary that day. The road itself offered ample visibility, and a driver with even a modicum of attention would have had a full tenth of a mile to react if they saw Katherine in the street. And then there was the inexplicable mystery of Katherine's location. The child who should have been walking towards home was discovered facing in the opposite direction, away from her home, which defied logic. The physical evidence on Katherine's body told a story that starkly contradicted the hit-and-run narrative, and the more the investigators probed, the more the hit-and-run theory crumbled. Other than her fractured skull, there were no catastrophic injuries, no shattered bones or internal bleeding, consistent with the violent impact of a car collision. The absence of these injuries suggested a different scenario. Instead, the medical examiner found minor abrasions on Katherine's extremities, wounds more likely to occur after a fall than a high-speed impact. According to Robert Bayardo, the medical examiner of Travis County, the injuries that Katherine sustained could have been the result of either jumping from a moving vehicle, being thrown from a moving vehicle, or falling from a moving vehicle. Sergeant Philip Kemp, a seasoned law enforcement officer, found himself in uncharted territory. The absence of eyewitnesses, coupled with the perplexing lack of any physical evidence, created a perfect storm of uncertainty. "I've worked on cases where there was very little evidence, but not one where there was no evidence," he said. A theory born from desperation rather than any evidence began to take shape, that perhaps Katherine had been clinging to the back of her mother's car before slipping off as they drove through the familiar streets of Elder Circle. The theory of Katherine holding onto the back of the car was a desperate attempt to provide a logical explanation for the inexplicable. However, the Korzilius family, consumed by grief, refused to accept this explanation. They hired private investigator Barbara O'Brien, a seasoned professional with a reputation for unraveling complex cases. O'Brien's keen eye for detail quickly dismantled the hit-and-run theory. The scorching August heat rendered the idea of a child clinging to a moving vehicle unrealistic. The car's physical structure offered limited options for a child's grip, a slippery bar on the back of the vehicle, or a door handle that would inevitably open if held. And then there was the matter of Katherine's left thumb, broken and immobilized in a cast at the time, making it impossible that she was able to maintain a secure hold. Finally, the thought of Nancy being oblivious to her daughter hanging onto the car's rear was a glaring oversight. The last possibility of what may have happened to Katherine was much more sinister. A vacant lot, a mere 30 yards from the mailbox and close to their home, became a focal point. A K-9 unit brought in days after the tragedy picked up Katherine's scent within the lot. This discovery suggested a horrifying scenario. Katherine was walking towards the lot when she was abducted. Investigators point to the meticulous arrangement of Katherine's body upon discovery. Her hair, her clothes, her posture. Everything seemed unnaturally composed, as if someone had staged her lifeless body. The image of a child snatched away from the safety of her neighborhood, murdered, and then carefully placed for discovery, was a haunting possibility that could not be ignored. Unfortunately, with each passing day, the case grew colder. No suspects emerged, and the initial theories have been largely dismissed. Nancy Korzilius, Katherine's mother, became a figure of both sympathy and scrutiny in the community. While initially considered a potential suspect based on the theory of Katherine falling from the car, the growing body of evidence pointed away from this tragic accident. A year after the tragic death of Katherine Korzilius, neighbors planted a tree and affixed a plaque bearing Katherine's name near her home, a small gesture to honor the memory of a child taken far too soon. The memory of Katherine Korzilius became a stark reminder of the fragility of innocence and the enduring power of a mother's love. The incident was immortalized by Bon Jovi in the song August 7th, 4:15, the date and time of Katherine's death. Bon Jovi said, "I think if Paul and Nancy as parents knew how it happened, perhaps it could help them with the closure of this tragic event. Nothing that anyone can say or do is ever going to bring their daughter back to them, but it's twice as hard not knowing what happened." Despite the passage of time, the case remains a mystery. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Fireside Unsolved. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Until next time, take it easy and be easy, you filthy bastards.